constitutional duty to hold this government accountable and to defend the best interest of the citizens. Yesterday's incident was yet another blatant attempt to suppress my voice. The Speaker of the House, acting in clear alignment with the government, ordered that my microphone be switched off and my audio cut so that the public would not hear my response to the false allegations being leveled against the former United Workers' Party administration. But no matter how hard they try to silence me, the truth will always come to light. Here are the facts. There are 3 separate agreements that all are interlinked relating to the Orange Grove Plaza Agreement, or as we know it, the Daher Mall. 1, there's a development agreement, which is the main agreement. There is the lease agreement, and then there is the transfer of land agreement. The Speaker of the House and the representative for Castries Central only made reference to the land transfer agreement. Yet the land transfer agreement makes reference to the development agreement, which is the main document. In 2012, the government of St. Lucia, under the then SLP administration, paid off the loan to the bank of 35 million EC dollars. That loan was made up of approximately $32 million for the asset and $3 million for interest payments that had occurred. The $30 million included an additional 10 acres of land as part of the deal, which was located in Union. In 2020, under my administration, the government entered into an agreement with Orange Grove Plaza to develop the property through Amazoma Properties, a government-formed company. Under this build-own-lease transfer, or BOLT arrangement, the developer paid $13.5 million EC dollars up front, which represented the payment for the ground floor. The developer then assumed responsibility for the full renovation of the building, including the upper 2 floors. This arrangement is no different to other similar BOLT arrangements entered into by the government of St. Lucia. Examples include the Ministry of Infrastructure building at Union and several police stations and fire stations across the island, and the Halls of Justice project, just to name a few. The government agreed to temporarily transfer the building and the land to the developer to allow them to fully develop the property. The government would then lease the 2 top floors from the developer for 15 years at just $4 per square foot. That $4 represented the cost for the retrofitting of the building and the office space, or the government's portion of the building and office space. After which the 2 floors would be transferred back to full government ownership. Upon this final transfer back to the government, we would no longer have to pay a monthly lease. This agreement would have saved taxpayers approximately $40 million in rent over the first 15 years and would further save the government at least $6 million annually after the period. This was a responsible, forward-thinking investment that prioritized long-term savings for the people of St. Lucia. Savings that could have been used to improve healthcare, fight crime, fix roads, and ease the cost of living. Instead, the SLP administration has abandoned the agreement, leaving the space vacant and unused for the last 3 years, while at the same time paying an exorbitant rent to their financiers at rates between $7 and $12 per square foot. We've even heard that the Halls of Justice was supposed to go as high as $16 a square foot. They have wasted $12 million over the last 3 years for a space that they have refused to move into. This is a blatant financial mismanagement and political corruption. They do not want to know the truth. But let me be clear. I will not be silenced. No amount of censorship, intimidation, or manipulation will stop me from standing up for the people of St. Lucia. The SLP's tactics will not work. The people of St. Lucia deserve accountability. The government must answer, why are they wasting taxpayers' money on inflated rental agreements while keeping a cost-saving government asset unused? What are they trying to hide? I remain committed to exposing the truth and fighting for the best interest of St. Lucians. No microphone switch, no audio cut, and no parliamentary games will stop me from doing my job. Thank you. Any questions? Good morning.
Good morning, Opposition Leader. We have a question from a journalist. The question is, do you feel that the Speaker is adequately following the standing orders?
It's very unfortunate that the Speaker continues to, at times, refer to himself as a judge. So let me say it very clearly. If I was looking for a judge, it is not Parliament I would go to find a judge. It would be the courts. More importantly, we know of the Speaker's attempts to become a lawyer, which he never succeeded. So from my understanding is, long before you can become a judge, you must first become a lawyer. That being said, I think it was wrong for the Speaker and certainly his inexperience and his lack of understanding of the law, that when he read in front of the House one of the documents involved in this issue, which was the land transfer, that document makes specific reference to the main document. So the land transfer was simply an agreement to transfer the land and the building to Orange Grove, which was part of the Bolt Agreement. Now, when you're not going to read the rest in the main document, you wouldn't understand that. And so to extrapolate from that I was lying when I said that the ground floor was sold, because remember, the minister indicated that I was lying and that we sold the entire building. Well, the land transfer document would say that. But as I said to you, the land transfer document is only part of the overarching agreement. And in the main agreement, reference is made to the fact that at the end of the 15 years, the two top floors will be transferred back to the ownership of the government. Look, this is no different than if we take the Halls of Justice. Constitution Park, where the Halls of Justice was going to go, and also the old Ministry of Education building, were sold to the developers of the Halls of Justice for $1. Okay? And it was done like that because the developer is going to mortgage or borrow money from the banks based on the security of the land and the building. At the end of the 12 years of the Halls of Justice, the developer was then going to sell the building back to the government for $1. That's how it works. So in order for the developer to have security for the banks, it's necessary that we transfer the assets to them. So same thing with the infrastructure building. We've done police stations where the land and the building were transferred, the ownership was transferred to NIPRO. And at the end of paying the lease, NIPRO transfers the land back to the state. So this was disingenuous, intended to malign our name. And I'm embarrassed for the Speaker that he would have caught himself up in this. And what's interesting for me is if you go back to 2012, the 5th of November of 2012 to be exact, Parliament debated this. where the then government, Kenny Anthony, borrowed $154 million. And in those borrowings, one of it was, and I'll read, to repay the Amazona Properties loan of EC $35 million, including a principal of $32 million, plus a 50% accumulated interest in the amount of $3.5 million. Now, interestingly, the persons that signed off on that SI, the then Speaker of the House was Peter Foster, and the President of the Senate at that time was Claudius Francis. So I have the document here. And so anybody can go and research this for themselves because it's an SI. And I think that this explains and gives the evidence to exactly what I said. When the government under Stephen Singh King first arranged to acquire the Daher Mall, a company called Amazona was set up, and the building and the land was transferred into Amazona. Amazona was fully owned by the state. The purpose of doing it that way was so that the government would not accumulate any further debt. So the loan that was being approved by FCIB at the time, which was to purchase the property and to renovate the property, that loan was being guaranteed only by the building and the land that they were selling us, and would not form part of the government's public debt. Sadly, when Sir John died, there was bickering as to what we should do, and that's where there was an accumulation of interest. When Kenny Anthony came in 2000, end of 2011, what he chose to do was to actually pay that loan off. And so in essence, that loan became now part of our national debt. When they did it, they clearly, in typical labor fashion, had no plan for the building. And everybody would have known for themselves that the building stayed there dormant. When I became Prime Minister in 2016, and even before, I'd pass that building every day and see what an eyesore it was, and also to look at the potential of what that building could do for creating jobs for St. Lucians and creating economic opportunity. And we immediately embarked on attempting to find a way to develop that property. Before COVID, agreement in principle had been obtained, but certainly when COVID came, there became even a greater level of anxiety on my part to make sure that we could stop the bleeding, because all this time, from 2012 up until 2020, the government was paying interest on that $35 million that they had borrowed. So when we met with the Orange Grove developers, the idea of creating a bolt was great.
Let me ask you this one question. What do you feel right now as they have not moved into the two top floors of that building, and as it pertains to the taxpayers' funding?
It's a very good question. I can't believe that 3 years has gone by. And in essence, the rental value of that space right now is $4 a square foot. Certainly as a former Minister of Finance, but particularly the Minister of Public Service, I would have been made acutely aware of all the rents that we had. Now, let's put $4 into perspective. You would have heard the Richard Fedrick in particular come after my father and the rent that government has with him. The rental rate that my father charges is $2.50. So it means if you move the persons who are renting from my father into that building, it's actually going to cost the state $1.50 more a square foot. But I do know that there are several locations that the government is renting that is well over $7.50 in rent. So those are the rents that you would want to transfer into the building. Now, not only have we seen that the government has not moved into 80,000 square feet of space, but in the last 3 years, we've seen that the government have rented several additional locations. And my understanding is that they're looking for even more locations. That is if government rents. But the government also had the opportunity, if it so desired, because this is a valuable rental location, to have rented it to the private sector and could have gotten $6, $7, $8 a square foot for that rent. And if in doing so, it means that the government actually would have made money on the rental situation. So the answer to your question, it's very distressing, but it's also telling us there's something else afoot. And the question is, why? Why is it that the government doesn't want to do that? Now remember, the developers of Orange Crescent, Orange Grove, are the same persons that are going to be developing the Rodney Bay Harbor, the project, the one in which the government waived the 2.5% on, right? So this is not to say that they don't like the developer. So who is the government think that they are penalizing by doing this? The only persons that they're penalizing is the taxpayers of this country that continue to have to carry the bill at the expense of so many other things that are necessary right now.
So, political leader, what is the cost of this project to the taxpayers, and how do you think they'll be affected by it?
Well, there are several different ways of answering that question. When the building was purchased by Amazona, when Stephen King was Prime Minister, the purchase price was around $30 million, as I said. And that included the building and also the land in the area, and also an additional 10 acres of land. So initially, up until Kenny Anthony came into government, it had cost the people of St. Lucia $5 million in interest. From the time that Kenny purchased it until we actually did the Bolt agreement, my understanding is that it accumulated approximately another $15 or $16 million in interest during that period. So we're now up to $20 million of interest. And if you now take the loss of the having to pay the $4 right now and getting nothing in exchange for it, is another $12 million in rent or lease payments the government has made that could have easily been offset by the rent that they're currently paying or by renting it to a private sector person. For instance, you can put a call center in there. And if the government chooses to do it just for the $4 to cover its cost, even if the government wants to do it for a little bit less, because it recognizes by putting a call center in there, it's going to create the economic activity in the overall location, would have significantly reduced the amount of money that the state would have had to pay. But clearly this government is not thinking like that. They're thinking about politics.
Political leader, back to the parliamentary chambers. Are you disappointed that despite winning in the courts, the speaker appears to be emballed?
Look, yesterday we were debating a bill on creating a real estate organization. So an entity that would regulate real estate brokers, real estate agents. So they would have to be registered and they would fall under a singular government-led body. It was the member from Castries Southeast, Joachim Henry, that during the course of his debate said that this new entity would have prevented disasters like Orange Grove or prevented disasters like HIA. And also he spoke about the Bonanza land. Now, that's why I spent some time getting clarity from the speaker as to what was the member speaking about and how does this correlate to the the debate. The speaker said it doesn't, but you're free to have this discussion. So based on what the member said, I felt I had to defend the previous government, me included, of some of the allegations that he made. And this is how this debate came in. So when you're going to be selective in the House as to who is supposed to follow the rules and who's not supposed to follow the rules, this is when we get into these kinds of problems. And everybody can see for themselves. Ministers, members on the other side are free to roam the world in debating, and I'm kept on a very tight leash for it. But as I said to you, I'm going to stand my ground because I recognize that I'm not there to represent Alan Chastanet. I am there to represent the people of St. Lucia. And the government continues to want to use Parliament to charade propaganda or to promote propaganda, including saying that I'm angry or trying to define who Alan Chastanet is. And I will stand on every opportunity to defend the reputation of myself, the reputation of the United Workers' Party, and very most importantly, defend the rights of the people of this country that are being so badly abused.
All right. Another question. Why was it the Speaker who introduced the Daha Agreement yesterday and not an MP? Do you think that the Speaker overstepped his authority?
No, in fact, if there's one thing I would say to you is I applaud the Speaker, and even though he had already established in his mind that he had already ruled on this, and again, remember he said he's acting as a judge, that he actually brought the document up. And it's in bringing the document up that we now understood on what basis the Speaker was making his decision. And what I'm here today to say is what the decision of the Speaker was based on a false premise. As I said to you, there were 3 agreements that were involved. The development agreement, which is made, reference is made to in the lease agreement, the transfer, the land transfer agreement. All he read was a land transfer agreement. In this particular situation, that's insufficient. You cannot read the land transfer agreement and make a decision as to who owned the land and what was going to happen in the absence of the development agreement. And the development agreement is very clear. In section 6 of the development agreement, it says that at the end of the lease period, and if nobody's owed any money and there's no issues, that the land, the 2 top floors are transferred back to the government. So the statement I made that the $13.5 million was paid for the ground floor and not for the building in its entirety is 100% correct. But if you read the land transfer agreement, then they're correct, because the land transfer agreement only cites the $13.5 million. But the land transfer agreement cannot be looked at in isolation, and the land transfer agreement specifically makes reference to the development agreement. Now, if you were a licensed lawyer, an experienced lawyer, you would understand that. But when somebody wants to sit at the seat and to try to assume responsibilities and authorities that he doesn't have, then he found himself in great difficulty. But it's not going to be at my expense. It's not going to be at the expense of the United Workers' Party. And it's certainly not going to be at the expense of what is true.
My final question for you, political leader. Are you disappointed that during one of the debates that MP for Central Castries, Richard Frederick, said that you only became interested in crime when a white person died up the Mon? Is it a clear example of imputing improper motives? Isn't the standing order quite clear against this?
On more than one occasion in the House sitting yesterday, racial remarks were made. One was very blatant about the pigmentation of people's skin. But we've come accustomed to this with Richard Frederick. That's the only game that he knows. is to try to demean, ridicule people, create hatred and racism in this country. And while the mic was off, this is what I was saying in part to the parliamentarians that were there. That when they sit there on their hands and take mumu tablets and don't respond to that and don't stand up to it, then they own it. So I think it's not an exaggeration for me to say that I think that the Prime Minister is racist. And I think many of the other people in the House have become racist, whether it's their hatred towards Alan Chastanet or their fear of losing the next election, whatever it is. And they've chosen that going down the racial lines like they did in the last election is their salvation. But I think that many more St. Lucians have woken up to what the playbook of the Labour Party is, and in particular, Richard Fedrick. You know, one of the points I made to the Prime Minister is when he was asked a question, because I made the statement that Richard Fedrick is the mouthpiece for the Prime Minister when he speaks on his show on Thursdays. Richard denied that. The Prime Minister simply said that once he is saying the truth, he's a big man and he's free to say what he wants to say. But I wanted to remind the Prime Minister that Richard Fedrick is in his ministry. Right? He's a junior minister in his ministry. And we all have a right to presume that anything that he says is also on behalf of the Prime Minister. And when we hear some of the radical things that Richard Fedrick says, and that there's no objection in any way by the Labour Party or by other government ministers, then we can now satisfy ourselves in saying that he's speaking for all of them. And it's a very sad day that we have a government in office that believes that they can confuse people and lie to people and hide behind Richard Fedrick. Now remember, Richard Fedrick is the same person that this government demonized. They said that he was a drug baron. They said he was involved in crime. They said the nastiest things. In fact, they went as far to facilitate or put pressure on the U.S. government to revoke his personal visa and his diplomatic visa. And yet today, Richard Fedrick is in their midst. Now, I want to make it very clear. United Workers' Party, certainly under my administration, made it very clear we do not want to have any relationship with Richard Fedrick. We don't believe that he's fit to be in government, and we don't believe he has the right integrity to be in government. He certainly doesn't have the discipline to be in government, and we expelled him from our party. And here today, he's being embraced, and whether they want to say he's a member or not, he's acting like a member of the Labour Party. So I think for all of us, it's very clear. Richard Fedrick is a member of the Labour Party and is representing every single Labour supporter there is in this country.
Good morning, Honourable Chastanet. We have two questions which came in via regional media, unrelated to this morning's situation. So the first is, St. Lucia has recorded 10 or 12 homicides so far for the year, including what's been reported as the latest happening last evening in Grosile, Grand River Grosile. Do you think that the government is taking the crime situation as serious as they should?
Look, I'm speaking as a leader of the opposition, and I can say that I've seen no indications that this government is doing what's necessary to fight crime. Let's just start with the police. I'm not going to get even into the current wage or contract negotiations with the police, and the police have said it themselves. They feel insulted, they feel betrayed, and they feel let down by what the government is offering them and the methodology they've used. And that methodology has included going public to say that there was an agreement, of which the head of the Police Welfare Association came out and has denied. There's been other public utterances by the government which can be construed as forms of intimidation. We then look at the Commissioner of Police. Since this government has come in, It's only on one occasion, I believe, that they've given somebody a longer-term contract, and that was Mrs. Pelios, who is now gone. You now have another person who has come in, Mr. Guard, who is acting, and sadly for Mr. Guard, his reputation and our faith in him has significantly diminished, given what has taken place with Impacts, that he wants to deny that there was a request by the DPP to pursue several of the cases. What he's tried to do with my own security detail, reacting to Richard Frederick, and then trying to deny that he did that, and now finding themselves in further hot water with what they're attempting to do. And whatever it is that the police are trying to do, there's been spurts of success, but the reality is we could see for ourselves none of what they're doing is sufficient to really curb crime in this country. Border control, what's going on at Bordelais. You know, the minister yesterday wanted to talk about the custody suites. We demolished a very old building that some people have gone as far as describing as hell on earth because of what the condition was there. That building was not considered a historic building. It was not registered as a historic building. As a courtesy to the trust, we attempted to try to incorporate the old structure, but it was impossible, and it was demolished. And here it is now. In 4 years, the government said that it was going to cost $1.5 million. The last number we heard was $4.5 million. And we've heard that it's not opened in the last year, I think it is, because they're having trouble getting the toilets. And we've asked questions as to who the contractor was or is, and we've still not found out answers. Because remember, this was a direct award in contradiction and contravention of our Finance Act. I say these things because the police are in disarray, and a lot of those problems are being caused by inconsistent policies by this government. Even the situation with the 2 young women that were murdered, and in the circumstance of one of them who was supposed to appear in court in a rape case, I would have thought, I think all of us would have thought, that the government would have used the opportunity to come to House and to make a minister's statement to say what they were going to do to remedy the problem. How are we going to provide protection for young women who have been sexually assaulted and who repeatedly, every time they do the right thing, end up being killed? Because Alana was not the first, sadly, that this has happened to. And I think that there have been several calls by the public that have aptly described what the current situation is. So this government, this police force, and the current administration, who we don't even still know who's in charge. You know, we got to go back. When the new cabinet was announced, there was no Minister of National Security. And it was about a week later, if I'm not mistaken, that the Prime Minister then came out and said, well, he's the Minister of National Security. And you had a Minister of Home Affairs who's been transferred. You have now a person who came in as the Minister of Crime Prevention, of which we don't know what that is, and eventually now has also assumed the Ministry of Home Affairs, who himself seems grossly unfit for the job. So I have to say that there's no comfort that we've been given as citizens of this country that this government has a handle on crime.
The final question. The government has begun pursuing the establishment of a sovereign wealth fund, which was an idea that you was first floated by you while serving as Prime Minister. What are your thoughts on this?
Sovereign wealth funds generally are established by countries that have surplus revenues. So we've seen a lot of the oil-rich countries, Norway, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, etc., that put their money into a sovereign wealth fund. And the purpose of the sovereign wealth fund is to take the assets of the state and have them invested not only in their own country, but globally, so that the people of the country can continue to have and accumulate wealth. So first of all, we don't have a surplus budget here. The sovereign wealth fund that we established to begin with was established, and it's called the Economic Fund. And the Economic Fund was being primarily funded through CIP revenues. And so the Economic Fund is supposed to act as our wealth fund. So I'm perplexed that this government at this point would want to now create a sovereign fund, and in the piece of legislation that they're proposing is they intended to outsource the management. Sadly for me, I've seen this proposal before, and I believe the persons who have made this proposal are the same people when we were in government. And the intention of the managers at that time was to take the buildings that government own, land that the government owns, any properties and assets the government has, and to put them into the wealth fund. And then to take that and borrow money against those things, leverage it, and then to claim to go and invest. Now the manager is going to be making commissions. I'm not sure that this is the right thing to do. And particularly, I want to say this, that when you look at the piece of legislation and it speaks about an annual audit, well, this government has failed dismally in meeting its obligations on annual audits. Look at the CIP. The last report was a year late, and that's with a 6-month reprieve. The current report is already 4 months late with the 6-month reprieve. The economic fund is supposed to be audited and a management report given every year. Has never happened. So we have no idea how millions of dollars have gone. So my confidence that when this government writes down things in legislation for checks and balances and guardrails for the people of St. Lucia to be comforted doesn't happen. So I think that the last straw, the last ounce of blood that this country has will be sucked dry if we allow this sovereign wealth fund to be opened and operated under the premise that this government wants to. One of the things I did not mention with the police, I think it's very, very important, is, here it is that a complaint was filed or made publicly by Richard Fedrick about my detail. And 4 days later, he was being transferred to Babonneau. And Jan Gustav, who also a complaint was made against, was sent on leave. But meanwhile, we have the deputy commissioner, of which much more serious allegations, and my understanding with substantially more evidence available, has remained on duty. And these allegations are of sexual assaults against other police officers. And this is important because this has become another issue of where a government has an opportunity to take a zero tolerance towards, and they have not. So how do we trust the hierarchy of the police when there are so many persons that are there that appear to be there through favor of the government? And there's evidence to suggest that their discretionary decisions are being compromised. And it means that our confidence and trust in the police force is dwindling every day. And so once the public now has no confidence in the police, it's going to make it impossible for the police to conduct their affairs. And this government is not appreciating the seriousness and the gravity of what is facing us and the loss of confidence that the public are having in the police force. And I dare say the growing level of lack of confidence that the public is gaining in this administration. Thank you.
Yes, I want to express my sincere thanks to the leader of the opposition for taking this opportunity to clarify the matters that pertain to what transpired at the House yesterday. And we will continue to keep you abreast with the latest developments. Of course, you also heard one of the ministers speak about the fact that the CIP unit and himself, as the minister responsible for CIP, was taken to court. But that, of course, we will dissect for you later and give you the facts on the issue. As you would probably be aware, and perhaps the Speaker of the House was not too aware of it, but there's a section in the standing orders of the House, section 35(2), I think it is, which states that, matters under judicial review or that are before the courts should not be debated in the House, especially if it's going to affect the outcome in any manner. I'm not sure whether in his judgment he was able to determine that what the minister said would not impact or have any effect on the case, but such is the operations of what we call government in St. Lucia. And, we here in this country have to be very careful that we take a stand and support the leader of the opposition and the United Workers' Party, not merely for the sake of political support, but for the defense of our democracy and our freedoms in this country. I want to thank you for joining us, and we appreciate greatly those of you in the diaspora who always join us. Please join us again tomorrow morning when we will be bringing you Meet the Opposition on RevUp St. Lucia, and you can also follow this on Facebook as well. And of course, I want to remind everyone of the grand event on Sunday. Well, of course, it is a big deal that the United Workers' Party is having their annual convention, but I must confess to you, the real big deal to me is the fact that on Sunday at Lakai in Dennery, the United Workers' Party will be presenting some new candidates, and you cannot afford to miss that. Come and see who they are and get a feel of them firsthand yourself. This should be starting at about 6 p.m. So see you in Dennery, Lakai Dennery on Sunday. Thank you very much.
St. Lucia is at a crossroads. Mismanagement, incompetence, and rising crime under the Philip J. Pierre administration have left us all struggling. But under Alan Chasney's leadership, our country flourished.